Aldric had become a potter. The irony was not lost on him. Hands that had once ended lives now shaped clay into bowls, cups, vessels meant to hold things gently. The workshop sat at the edge of a small village in Kaleth, where the rain fell soft and constant, drumming on the tin roof like a lullaby he could never quite trust. Doru ran the shop. She asked no questions about the scars on his hands or why he never slept past dawn. She simply left him to the wheel, with the wet earth spinning between his palms. It had been 3 years since he last held a blade. 3 years of mud under his nails instead of blood. The war had ended 50 years ago, but Kaleth still wore its wounds like a second skin. Villages rebuilt on scorched ground. Children born into a peace their grandparents couldn't believe in. And underneath it all, the dungeons. They had appeared 10 years after the ceasefire. Rifts in reality that swallowed the unwary and spat out nightmares. It began as a faint itch on his left forearm. Aldric ignored it while trimming the base of a bowl, but the sensation deepened, became a burn. He rolled up his sleeve. A mark, black as charcoal, shaped like a doorway half open, etched into his skin as though drawn by an invisible hand. He recognized it immediately, the hollow mark. He had heard whispers in the village. Those who received it were called into the dungeons beneath Kaleth, pulled by something older than the war, older than memory. The mark did not grant strength or speed. It did not make you a hero. It simply revealed, showed you what had been carved out of you, what you had lost and could never name. Aldric stared at the mark, his hands still wet with clay. The rain outside grew heavier. He had spent 30 years learning to forget, and now the dungeon was asking him to remember. Doru found him standing in the rain behind the workshop, staring at his arm. She did not ask to see the mark. She simply stood beside him, her one good eye fixed on the horizon where the dungeon entrance waited, a black scar in the hillside. "You are going," she said. It was not a question. Aldric nodded slowly. "The mark does not let go," Doru continued, her voice soft as the rain. "It pulls until you answer. I have seen it before." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside, a vial of clear liquid and a strip of linen. "For when the remembering hurts too much," she said. He took it without speaking. Doru turned to leave, then paused. "Whatever you were, Aldric, you were not only that." He wished he could believe her, but the mark on his arm pulsed faintly, and he knew the dungeon would not care what he had become, only what he had been. The entrance to the dungeon was a wound in the earth. Stone steps descended into darkness, slick with rain and moss. Aldric carried no weapon. He had buried his blades years ago, and he would not unearth them now. The mark burned brighter as he stepped inside. The air changed. No longer rain and clay, but stone and iron and something older. Decay, perhaps, or memory given shape. The walls were carved with symbols he did not recognize, scripts from the war era, from before. The dungeon did not feel like a place. It felt like a question. Each step downward was a choice to keep answering. The light from above faded. The rain sound grew distant. And then, silence. A silence so complete, it felt like drowning. Aldric's breath echoed. The mark on his arm glowed faintly now, casting shadows on the walls. He walked deeper. The dungeon waited. The corridor opened into a chamber, lit by no visible source. In the center, a pool of still water. Aldric approached slowly. The mark pulsed. The water rippled, though nothing had touched it. And then he saw. Not a reflection, a memory. Himself, younger, 20 perhaps. Blood on his hands, a contract completed, a name crossed off a list. He had forgotten the face of the dead, but the dungeon had not. The memory played in the water like a film, silent and merciless. He watched himself walk away from the body without hesitation, without regret. The mark burned hotter. The memory faded. Words appeared on the surface of the water, written in a script he somehow understood. What was taken from you was not your guilt. It was your ability to feel it. Aldric stepped back. His hands were shaking. The dungeon was not punishing him. It was showing him what he had lost. And that was worse. A voice behind him, soft, almost familiar. So you came. Aldric turned. A figure stood in the doorway, draped in plum and black, silver rings catching the faint light. Rila. He knew the name before it was spoken. Knew it the way you know the shape of a scar you gave yourself. Rila stepped forward, boots silent on stone. Their face was unreadable, pale as winter. You do not remember me, Rila said, but I remember you. The mark on Aldric's arm flared. Rila raised their left hand, the same mark glowing on their palm. We were made by the same hands, Aldric, shaped by the same war. You killed for one side, I killed for the other. And neither of us were told the sides were the same. Aldric's breath caught. Rila smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The dungeon brings us here to see the truth. That we were never enemies, only tools. Rila moved to the pool, knelt beside it, placed their marked hand on the surface. The water shimmered. Another memory rose. 2 children, different villages, different families, both taken in the same year, trained in different camps, given different names, fed different lies. Aldric saw himself as a boy, learning to hold a knife. Saw Rylith in another room, learning the same grip. Saw the handlers, the same faces in both memories. The water rippled faster now, showing mission after mission, kill after kill. Every target Aldric eliminated had been chosen to protect Rylith's handlers. Every target Rylith eliminated had been chosen to protect Aldric's. A perfect circle of control. They had been hunting ghosts while the architects of the war grew fat on the violence. Rylith stood. "You see it now," they said quietly. "We bled for men who never bled at all." Above ground, Doru sat in the workshop, staring at the rain. She had seen the mark before, on her brother, on her daughter. Neither had returned from the dungeon. The hollow mark did not kill, it revealed. And sometimes, what it revealed was too much to carry back into the light. She lit a candle, placed it in the window. A small beacon, though she did not know if Aldric would see it. The rain drummed on. Kaleth had been recovering for 50 years, but recovery was not the same as healing. The war had ended, but its machinery still turned beneath the surface. The dungeons were not natural, they were made, designed to pull in those who had been shaped by the war, to show them what they had become. Doru wondered if the dungeon wanted them to change, or simply to break. She did not know which would be kinder. Rylith led Aldric deeper. The dungeon shifted around them, walls breathing, reshaping. They entered a hall lined with portraits, men and women in fine clothes, faces Aldric had never seen but somehow recognized. "The architects," Rylith whispered. "The ones who drew the borders, who decided which village burned and which was spared, who chose us." Aldric stared at the faces, wealthy, unburdened, smiling. The mark on his arm burned so hot, he thought it might scar through to bone. "These are the ones we should have killed," Rylith said, voice flat. "But we were too busy killing each other." The portraits began to shift, aging, rotting, faces collapsing into skulls. The dungeon was showing their deaths. Natural, peaceful, in soft beds surrounded by family, unpunished. Aldric felt something crack inside him. Not rage. Rage would have been cleaner. This was grief, for the boy he had been, for the person he might have become. At the end of the hall, a door. Rylith stopped. "Beyond this," they said, "is the final chamber. The place where the mark either consumes you or sets you free." Aldric looked at them. "What does it show?" Rylith's expression did not change. "A choice." Aldric waited. Rylith continued. "You can take the memory of what was done to you and carry it back into the world. Or you can leave it here, forget again. Go back to your clay and your rain. The mark will fade. You will be ordinary. Aldric's throat tightened. And you? Rylith smiled faintly. I have already chosen. I came here to remember, to carry it, to make sure it is never done again. Aldric stared at the door. He thought of Doru, of the workshop, of the quiet he had built. And he thought of the boy he had been, who never got to choose. Aldric opened the door. The chamber beyond was small, empty except for a mirror. Not glass, water suspended in air, held by no frame. He stepped forward. Rylith remained in the doorway. The mirror showed him as he was. Grey hair, scarred hands, tired eyes. And then it shifted. Showed him as he had been. The boy, the blade, the blood. And then it showed him as he could be. Not unscarred, not unburdened, but awake. The mark pulsed once, twice. The mirror asked without words, will you remember? Will you carry the weight of what you were so that you can choose what you become? Aldric reached out. His fingers touched the surface of the water mirror. It was cold. It was unbearably cold. And he did not pull away. Aldric woke on the steps outside the dungeon, rain on his face. Doru crouched beside him, her one good eye wet. The mark on his arm was still there, but it no longer burned. It was simply part of him now, a scar that told the truth. He sat up slowly. How long? He asked. 3 days, Doru said. She helped him stand. He looked back at the dungeon entrance. Rylith was gone. But he knew they were out there, somewhere in Kaleth, carrying the same memory, the same weight. Doru handed him a cup of water. He drank. The rain had not stopped. It never would. But for the first time in 30 years, Aldric did not mind the sound. Aldric returned to the workshop, but he did not return to forgetting. He shaped clay, yes, but now he also carved. Small symbols into the bases of bowls, marks that meant remember. Marks that meant this was done and must not be done again. Doru watched him work and said nothing. One evening, a visitor came, Rylith. They stood in the doorway, rain dripping from their coat. Aldric set down his tools. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Rylith spoke. There are others, marked, still in the dungeons, still learning what was taken. Aldric nodded slowly. And you want to help them? Rylith's expression was unreadable. I want to make sure they have a choice, that someone is there when they come back up. Aldric wiped the clay from his hands. He thought of the boy in the water, of the mirror, of the cold. When do we start? They found the first one a week later. A young woman collapsed at the dungeon mouth. mark glowing on her shoulder. Aldric knelt beside her while Rila kept watch. She was shaking, eyes unfocused. He gave her water, spoke quietly. "You are out. You survived." She stared at him. "I remembered," she whispered. "I remembered what I did. What they make me do." Aldric nodded. "I know." She gripped his arm. "How do you live with it?" He was quiet for a long moment. The rain fell between them. "You carry it," he said finally. "You do not let it make you forget again. You let it make you careful, kind, awake." The woman's breathing slowed. Rila approached, offered a hand. She took it. Together, they walked her back toward the village, through the rain, through the weight of memory. And Aldric thought, for the first time, that maybe this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the choice to tend them. Months passed. The workshop became a waypoint. Those who came back from the dungeons knew they could find Aldric and Rila there. A place to sit, to breathe, to speak or not speak. Doru kept the fire going, kept the rain from coming through the roof. Aldric shaped clay and listened. Rila organized, mapped the dungeons, learned which marks led where, what each chamber revealed. Slowly, a network formed. People who had been weapons, learning to be people again. Kaleth still bled. The rain still fell. The war still haunted the stones. But in a small workshop at the edge of a nameless village, something new was growing. Not forgetting, not revenge. Just the quiet, stubborn work of remembering together. Aldric sat at the wheel one evening, hands in the clay, and realized he was no longer waiting to disappear. He was here, present, awake. The mark on his arm glowed faintly in the firelight, and for the first time in 30 years, he was grateful for the wait.